Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mio on Board podcast. This is the Rozenstruik versus Volkov card. Kind of a disappointing note on UFC main events is the ridiculous number of heavyweight fights that main event here. 20%, 12 main events in the last 61 events, start of 2021, heavyweight. Flyweight, women's flyweight, two pretty interesting divisions, 0. And women's featherweight even somehow has one. Go figure. Anyways, let's move on from that. The card is actually pretty good. The main event, I'm not super intrigued with. We'll get to it in a second. But there is a lot to like about the card, actually. There is the co-main event between Danny Ige and Movsar Evloev. That's an important fight. That's a good fight. Also, apologies if I sniffle or whatever. Those who have been watching for a while know that tends to happen just randomly. But today it'll probably be unavoidable because I am suffering from some allergies. I think this time of year there's a particular park somewhat near me that I walk by periodically. And I think I'm allergic to something that blooms in the late May, early June time. So maybe I'll just have to do my best to avoid that particular area of the neighborhood. And then we also have Lucas Almeida, Mike Trezano. That's a good action fight. I'm looking forward to that. Ode Osborne versus Zaru Kadashiev. That's a good fight. Looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to... This will not be for everyone, but Alex De Silva, Joe Selecki. That's a really kind of high-level grappler battle that I'm fairly interested in. And I'm also pretty interested in Jeff Molina versus Zhalgas Zumagulov, which should be good. And my fight of the night, Aaron Blanchfield, JJ Aldridge, which opens up the card. I think that's an incredibly bad position on the card. I think that's the most important fight in terms of the future of a division on the card, and it's opening up the card. I don't really understand the structure of this card in general from the main event down to the bottom, but we'll roll with it, obviously. What is done is done. Main event, Alexander Volkov versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik, heavyweight fight. If we turn back the clock a little bit, Volkov would be the easy pick here because while Jairzinho Rozenstruik is a really powerful puncher, you could call him a slightly more technical, slightly less lethal version of Derek Lewis to a certain degree. It would be a fight that would look a lot like what I think Volkov versus Lewis looked like until Volkov got knocked out, which is Volkov's got range that allows him to remain fairly safe while throwing volume. He's got excellent outside striking. He's got good footwork. He can work the range and just kind of outmaneuver Rozenstruik in a similar way to what we've seen before. Notably by Cyril Gahn would be like a particularly good example of that. The Gahn fight. Even the Curtis Blades fight during the striking exchanges was a good example of that. And otherwise, he's not really fought a tremendous number of like complete strikers that he's really had a great deal of success against. I mean, yeah, he's got a win over Overeem, but that took to the 5th round of a fight that was tragically dull. And he's got a win over Andrei Arlovsky in 29 seconds. Like, undeniable power. Undeniably takes people's heads off. But if Volkov was the Volkov of old, I would have no real considerations on the matter. But Volkov has looked pretty bad lately. He's not been terrible. I mean, and admittedly, he's also beaten guys who try to bring a striking first game plan to him. Like he did TKO Alistair Overeem last year. He did knock out Walt Harris in 2020. But the losses to Curtis Blades, Cyril Gahn, and Tom Aspinall were all pretty definitive. And he did have more struggles than I thought he should have had with Marcin Tybura. I'm still tempted to pick him, though, here, because at the end of the day, Jairzinho Rozenstruik just does not have a minute-to-minute winning style. He doesn't have a style that really wins outside of the big knockout, frankly. He's pretty low volume. He's very, very patient, which is good from the knockout standpoint because it means that he stays fresh pretty much the whole time. He doesn't exert energy, quote unquote, uselessly, but he still is waiting for that big opening. And like, does Volkov give him that opening? Because this fight still feels more like Volkov's fight with Walt Harris than it does Volkov's fights with Cyril Gahn, with Tom Aspinall, with Curtis Blades, and a little bit like the Overeem fight even. So it's a bit of a weird one. It's one that I'm going back and forth. Like, I want Volkov to win because Rozenstruik is like peak heavyweightness, where his fights are interesting because there could be a knockout at any moment. Interesting because there is that potential for extreme violence, but there's also a tremendous possibility for just inactivity and boringness, which is unfortunately the way of heavyweight. So, do I take the heavyweight meta, or do I take the guy who's put together a fairly comprehensive style, but at the same time, I think just took the wrong lessons from his loss to Curtis Blades, which was he started to put weight on. He started to try to get bigger than before, thicker than before. And I don't think that's the right way to go. I don't think his body's going to function that well that way. I think it has made him slower. I think it has made him more susceptible to getting caught. And as a result, I am going to pick Jairzinho or Rozenstruik to knock out Volkov. But it's not going to surprise me in any way if this winds up being 5 rounds of Rozenstruik being fairly inactive on his way to a loss. It also wouldn't supremely surprise me if Volkov were to get in a try to finish. Excuse me. Stuffy. Anyways, this is not that interesting a fight I think is, in the end, what I'm trying to get across. Dan Ige versus Movsar Evloev, though. This is really weird matchmaking, but it is also a really, really interesting fight. It's weird matchmaking because Ige is coming off of losses to Chan Sung Jung and Josh Emmett. There is absolutely no shame in losing either of those fights. And the Josh Emmett fight was actually fairly controversial. So you do definitely have that going for you as kind of like a weirdness, though. But the fight is, I think, very, very interesting because I've been very interested to see Movsar Evloev get his first big test. And it's here because, no disrespect to Mike Grundy, to Nick Lentz, to Hakeem Dawodu, to Enrique Barzola, to Suo Choi, you guys were not the big test for Evloev. Because, for one thing, with the exception of, I suppose, Barzola, everyone on that list has a very obvious path to victory against. They all have a very definitive weakness, whether that's Hakeem Dawodu's really anything but busy striking game being not super up to par, be that Nick Lentz's significant cardio issues, be that Mike Grundy's lack of a striking game and being very much reliant on a control-heavy wrestling game, which he actually did pretty well against Evloev with. So there is that. Ige is the first guy who's like, no, I legitimately can do everything. My strongest aspects of my game is my pocket boxing activity, and the fact that while I get tired, I seemingly get second wins quite frequently and really bring a pretty reasonable pace to the table. That being said, I kind of have to look at this fight and think that Evloev should win this fight. And I think that is the idea. I think he's the prospect of the future, the guy who's moving up in the world, in the division, and so on. And is going to be a major player for time to come because how old is he? He's 28 years old, so yeah, he's got plenty of time. Probably got like what, seven years of like fairly solid prime to go, and he's got a really well put together game. It feels very MMA native, and what I mean by that is that while everything is not necessarily structurally, technically form sound, it does blend fairly well together. Like he can strike, transition to wrestling, and not have that hiccup that we see with Probably the worst example of this would be Nick Maximoff. Well, okay, no, Maximoff is like a bad example because he's too bad at that. Gage Petrosky might be Andre Petrosky might be a good example of this, where you can kind of see the physical signs and the tells and the hiccups as he's transitioning from his striking to his wrestling. Evil doesn't really have that. I mean, there are still some signs. There's always going to be some signs, some shifting of the body language, some changes to the form, but it's about as close to fully melded together, fully fusioned striking and grappling to the point where it's hard to prepare for it. And I just think that he is going to be able to out wrestle Danny Gay. He's going to be able to hang around on the feet, probably have moments of success even, and he's going to be able to transition into a wrestling game, and that probably should lead to a decision. If not, maybe a submission, maybe a TKO stoppage. These are both on the table. Evloev is not a he's a very control-oriented grappler, but he's not without danger. And like I said, Ige does go through periods of getting tired in a fight. He kind of saves himself by, like I said, having like second and third wins across the fight. Like it's one of those, Ige's tired now. You should probably finish him before he finds his gas again. And that might force maybe a little bit more of a risky top style from Evloev. But we don't know. And that's kind of the thing, is he is a guy who, this is the high point. This is the upper level of what he's ever faced. But I do think he's going to win this fight. I just think that his dominant side skill set does still have the answers for what Ige does, even if Ige poses way more questions than anyone that he has previously fought. So I'm going with Evloev by probably decision. Let's move on to the next fight. Mike Trizano versus Lucas Almeida. Taking Mike Trizano to win a decision or like a late second, third round TKO. My reason is that I really like Lucas Almeida as an action fighter. He goes out, he really wants to put the pressure on you. He takes risks, he leaves openings, but he backs it up by being someone who is very powerful. Like it does seem very uncomfortable to be pressured by Almeida. It looks very painful to be pressured by Lucas Almeida. But Trizano, I think, can handle that. Like, Trizano does do some good work on the back foot, does do good counter work, does adapt his striking to the circumstances and the openings being provided by the opponent. And he does have pretty good accuracy, pretty good timing. Almeida's never been finished, so that's why I'm probably favoring the decision option here. Even though Almeida does get tired, because, let's face it, the way he fights is definitely a guy who has finished a lot of people in the first round. It's definitely a guy who has asked that first question of, what happens if I hit you really hard and pressure you and hit you again and again? Do you have an answer for that? And I'm just going with, like, Trizano probably does have the answer for that. Trizano's been pretty impressive, to be honest. I mean, yes, he's coming off a loss to Hakeem Dawodu. Who would have thought I'd be talking about Hakeem Dawodu a lot during this card? But Hakeem Dawodu is a much better striker and much better paced fighter than Lucas Almeida is. And the loss to Grant Dawson just doesn't seem at all probative, because if there are two fighters that are more opposite than Lucas Almeida and Grant Dawson, you know what? I take that back, actually, because both of them are inherently pressure fighters, but Dawson is doing it through wrestling more so than striking, and Almeida is doing it through power striking. So, like, this is closer to like the Ludwig Klein fight, which Trizano looked very impressive in and did win. And then you got the Luis Pena and Joe Giannetti. By the way, what was the deal with Joe Giannetti after the Ultimate Fighter 27 not getting a contract? Like, he was a finalist on that season of the Ultimate Fighter, undefeated finalist, took his first loss ever to Mike Trizano, and then wound up in Cage Titans. I don't fully understand what was up with that. Where is Cage Titans based out of, anyways? I don't think I've heard of this promotion. Massachusetts fight scene. Okay. Anyways, So yeah, I gotta go with Trezano. He just has way more, um, better put together style. Also, this is Almeida dropping down to 145, and I don't think that's a good idea because normally speaking, if you're a fighter who has cardio issues, cutting down in weight class is not going to help those cardio issues. So that is a big concern I have looking at the big power game of Lucas Almeida. Now, to be clear, his power game probably will translate better down there. He'll probably hit harder. He'll be more physically imposing than he has been at lightweight. But I don't think that like physical imposition at lightweight was honestly his problem. His problem, I mean, for one thing, he only lost one fight, and that was his contender series fight against Daniel Zellhuber, I think is how you say it. And Zellhuber really just survived the storm and then started to do his thing. And Zellhuber also is himself a very physical lightweight. So I'm not really sure what the deal with the featherweight cut is. I think that probably is a bad idea, but we'll see. And that's kind of really about all I have to say on that fight. Polyana Viana versus Karine Silva, two very physically imposing fighters who I think actually have very poorly built styles. Polyana Botello is very physically impressive. Go back and watch the Luana Carolina first round of that fight and realize that Luana Carolina is a, generally speaking, strong, large fighter. Someone who, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to look it up really quickly here because I don't want to say it before I know it's true. Yeah, is a fighter who actually in the clinch had a great deal of success against Lupita Godinez, who herself is a very strong, admittedly, strawweight fighter as opposed to flyweight fighter, but someone that really could be shut down. Like Carolina is a very physical presence in the clinch, and Botello, before gassing out to a certain degree, went out there and showed off the power game, like just hefting her up and depositing her to the mat with authority. Some people gave it a 10-8 first round. A lot of people gave her that fight. But I do kind of get like, she faded badly. She fades badly. I don't know if Karine Silva has really the same problem. I know she's gone deep into fights, but they're all fights that have also not really seen. It's kind of the problem. The fights of hers that I have seen have ended pretty quickly, like her Contender Series fight, her win over Sydney Roca, her win over Simone de Silva. And the only decision I've seen of hers is her loss to Dion Barboza. And that's it kind of puts me in a weird place. Like, does Botello win just because someone's used to dominating early and used to having a lot of early success, and you don't generally have a lot of success early against Botello? That being said, I don't really know what Botello's finishing game is like, to be honest. Well, I do. What I mean is, I don't see how she finishes this fight, because this is kind of the problem. This is sort of the difference between, for example, Botello, and we were just talking about Lucas Almeida, is Lucas Almeida, with his tendency to fade and his cardio issues, at least has a finishing game out of the gate. Like, that he asks a very strong question of you that a lot of people cannot answer without getting finished. Botello doesn't really have that. Her physical game is molded into a more, frankly, decision winning style. That also fades. It's kind of weird in that regard. I mean, she does have some finishes. She does good body work, for example. She finished Siri Kondo and Karina Rodriguez with kicks to the body. That's pretty impressive. She's got power. She hits hard. I'm not saying she can't finish. But it seems ironically like she's developed a game that is, for lack of a better term, sort of the meta game of how to win a decision without developing necessarily the deep well of cardio that should go with that. Like, it's it's okay, I suppose, to be a Lucas Almeida who is going to fade, but you have to survive him than being a Poliana Botello who's going to more or less just kind of like win round one and then fade. That's it's a bit of a question mark there. And that's why I'm going with Karine Silva to win by submission at some point. I think that Botello has some reckless abandon when it comes to the grappling game. She's also someone who very much wants to grapple in a lot of ways. She can strike. She is pretty good at it. But the Luana Carolina fight would be like a good example of like she was having some success on the feet, but still felt the need to go into the clinch and go for the takedown and kind of wear herself down. And while I see her taking round one against Silva, and I have my own concerns about Silva as a cardio machine, I do wonder if she catches her and gets a submission. But honestly, if you think Botello is going to just steamroller, there's nothing I can say that is actually going to be particularly against that idea, to be honest, because Silva's level of competition and wins is not great. It's not amazing. She's had like some good names on the list, but they're losses to like Marina Moroz, for example. And otherwise, it's a pretty shallow talent pool. So let's move on to Ode Osborne versus Zaruk Adashev. I think this is going to be a fun fight. Both of these fighters are very fun. They're both like kind of stand and bang kind of guys. Adashev has good power, I think, but it hasn't really translated. I mean, he's only 4-3 in his career. He's a guy who I get why the UFC signed him. He had made a pretty good name of himself in Bellator and had some non-MMA credentials. So it's definitely one of those ones you rush. And he's in his late 20s, so it's not like there's it's not like there isn't a ticking clock involved here. But he has not been amazing in the UFC. Getting finished by Tyson Nam in your debut in 32 seconds, not necessarily a problem, but then losing to Sumo Jarji and then beating Ryan Benoit. It has to be said, Ryan Benoit is not the... Ryan Benoit has been like really the bare bones testing ground of the flyweight division. Like if you can't beat him, you have significant problems because his style of fighting is like so not effective at flyweight. Because it's to a degree it's kind of like the Jairzinho Rozenstruik style of fighting where it's low velocity, kind of reliant on the fact that he has inherent power and inherent strength, but like. It's flyweight, my man. People can move. People generally have a reasonably well put together game at flyweight. Like you can't apply heavyweight or 205 meta to 125 and expect to have a lot of success. And that kind of is what Benoit's trying to do. This is kind of just a fancy way of saying I am taking Ode Osborne. I think that there's just more functional MMA stuff to his game. I also believe he's quite a bit longer. He's 2 inches taller. 7-inch reach advantage. I don't really know what Adashev does to counter that, to be honest, because he's not a bad striker by any means. He's actually very well put together striker, but I do wonder if like a lot of the problems he had with Sumo Jarji just aren't absolutely present in his fight with Ode Osborne, and with a better schooled fighter who probably can employ wrestling adages to mix up some things to it. Osborne's a pretty legitimately good fighter, and I'm excited to see what he does here. Coming off the win over CJ Vergara. Now, granted, I was talking about how Adashev has like nothing really comparable to Osborne on his record. Osborne doesn't have anything really comparable to Adashev on his record. The two major step up in competitions he has are Brian Kelleher and Manel Kape, both of whom beat him, both of whom finished him in the first round. That's distressing. And his biggest win is, like I said, CJ Vergara. So it could be that I'm in for a rude awakening when Adashev comes out there and just instantly starts having success. And Osborne really doesn't actually have a way to retain the range and mix in some wrestling to keep Adashev off balance. So this is kind of a pick out of like hope to a certain degree and belief in the Syndicate MMA Academy that maybe is misplaced. We'll find out. Alonzo Metafield versus Ashar Mozharef. No mercy. Mozharef is a terrifying looking dude, man. Those tattoos are concerning, and he looks a little bit like the villain from the most recent Undisputed movie, which is immediately put me on his side. But I mean, he's a guy who's 19-12, with a variety of different losses, variety of skill levels, and not that I have a tremendous amount of faith in Alonzo Metafield, because I don't. Almost every time he's had a step up in competition, it's actually gone fairly poorly. The loss to Devin Clark, the loss to Ovan St. Preux. There is a win against Paul Craig in there, and I guess you could say that Ed Herman is somewhat of a step up. But Paul Craig is a very specific test, and if you just don't go to the ground with him, you can probably have success. And Ed Herman is super slow. And then he had the fight. He's coming off the loss to William Knight, which was a fight I thought he would win, because William Knight is not very good. Just in a nutshell, he's not very good. But yeah, the physicality of Knight kind of seemed to freak him out a little bit and put him at a disadvantage. I still have to pick him here. He's fighting against a fighter that he is probably more physically prevalent than. He's shorter than, admittedly, but I think probably has a bigger reach because he does have a pretty massive 76-inch reach for a 6-foot-tall guy. And again, it's not like Mozharef has a tremendously deep skill level of talent. This is a guy who has lost to Christian Torres. He's not a very good fighter. He's lost to Mehdi Barji. He's not a very good fighter. He's lost to Idar D'Souza. He's not a very good fighter, and also was a bulldog choke. I've not seen that fight, but like bulldog choke loss is it's concerning. And I mean, what is his biggest win? It's I don't think there really is even a win that really stands out on his resume. Actually, a little bit puzzled why he's been signed. A little bit. Like, it's not the worst signing in the world, but given the whole, like, anti-Russian... Well, I guess he is Ukrainian, actually. I keep thinking he's Russian, but he is Ukrainian, and he trains at AKA Thailand, so maybe that's the answer. Get some Ukrainian talent in here while the goodwill is good. I don't know. But, yeah, no, I have to pick Metafield. Metafield is not going to surprise me losing to anybody, because so much of his game is just, I am big, I am scary, I am physical. There's not a lot of technique backing that. And that means that he can definitely lose, but there's not really anything to Mozharef that really stands out. Felice Herring versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz, too. Both of these girls are on their way out of women. Both of these women are on their way out of the UFC and high-level competition. Kowalkiewicz has beaten Herring before. Kowalkiewicz has looked absolutely terrible since winning that fight against her. She's lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row, including a loss to Jessica Penne, which is really concerning. The other losses, not so much. I mean, Jeanne Yan, very good fighter. Alexa Grasso, very good fighter. Michelle Watterson, good veteran. Jessica Andrade, monster. So there's definitely, like, there's definitely a built-in excuse to almost all of them. But Volkovich just hasn't been the same since she lost to Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Jędrzejczyk took that soul. She immediately got subbed by Claudia Gadelha. Again, like, outside of the Penne loss, you could argue these are all top fighters who may have beaten her before, but it just seems like being aware that her game doesn't function without relying on exceptional toughness. And the fact that, while her toughness still hasn't really failed her, her stoppages are by submission, she's been hurt a number of times, and she just doesn't have that. I'm using ignorance here. I don't want to use the word ignorance, because ignorance has like all kinds of negative connotation to it. But in this case, it's not necessarily a negative. She's now aware that she can be hurt, and the same level of confidence and kind of Terminator-esque ability isn't really there anymore. And that's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a problem. But at the same time, like, she beat Herrig with that style going on. Herrig has looked herself not great, losing to Michelle Waterson and Jandaroba afterwards. I'll go with Kowalkiewicz to win by decision, but neither of these are girls that are ladies that I feel good about watching fight. But you know what? Maybe watching two girls that I don't feel good about fighting in general, fighting each other, won't be so bad. But that's how we're leading off the main card, apparently. So yeah, another kind of weird one, especially given that Blanchfield and Aldridge is gonna be a good fight. But yeah, we'll go with Carolina. I am noting, I don't usually talk about betting odds for like every fight, but I am noting that Carolina is getting underdog odds. I get it. She's lost 5 in a row. But at the same time, I don't get it, because she's beaten Herrig before. That was her win before the losing streak. And Herrig hasn't won after that either. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm taking Joe Selecki to beat Alex De Silva. And that's going to sound like really dismissive of the fight. I'm actually really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a fun grappling affair. I think both of these guys are actually excellent grapplers. We should see some very good scrambles. We should see some submission attempts, although probably not anything landing. And Selecki's going to come out on top, just because I believe in Selecki's grappling chops a little bit more than I do De Silva's. Selecki, absolutely pacified Jim Miller, which was incredibly exciting. That being said, he did lose to Jared Gordon because he faded a bit late. But and after Jared Gordon kind of got taken out by Gary Dawson, we were talking about him earlier. That doesn't exactly bode well, but I mean, at the same time, De Silva's biggest grappling challenge in the UFC is Alexander Yakovlev, and he did get submitted by him. He did thoroughly grapple Casulo Vargas, though. I'm not really sure if that's an endorsement. I mean, I guess what, at the end of the day, I'm just saying, well, this is a really interesting fight to watch from a breakdown standpoint. It just kind of boils down to, there are levels to the grappling game. Selecki's at a higher level, and De Silva's not. While De Silva is probably the better striker of the two, it's not a functional path to victory for him. It's not something that he's really emphasized throughout his career. It's a lot of submissions and a lot of groundwork. So if you're going to grapple as a primary mode of fighting with Joe Selecki, there's a good chance that Selecki's going to win. Damon Jackson versus Daniel Argueta. This is a weird fight because Damon Jackson's actually on a pretty good streak here, beating Canelo Kirk and Charles Rosa. I know this fight was supposed to be Derek Minner versus Damon Jackson. That would have been also a weird fight, because Minner's on a 2-fight losing spree to Ryan Hall and Darren Elkins. That feels very winnable for Dave. I don't know what they're doing with Damon Jackson, I guess is what I'm getting. He'll probably win this fight. Argueta, he's undefeated, so there's that going for him, but he's an undefeated bantamweight. This fight's at featherweight. Jackson's pretty physically opposing at featherweight. We saw that really against Canelo Kirk. I mean, that was actually the surprise of the Canelo Kirk fight. I picked Canelo Kirk to win that fight, thinking that, the hype was somewhat real, and that his physicality was. And Jackson was like, nope, nope, I am way stronger than you. I'm going to bully you around, and I'm going to do my thing. And I can't help but think that Argueta, a guy who does that to people less technically deep and set than David Jackson, and physically weaker than Damon Jackson, is probably going to have a hard time with Damon Jackson. Another fight that I really am having a hard time giving a care about is Benoit Saint Denis versus Nicholas Stolze. So basically, there are essentially two things at play here. One is that Saint Denis, well, he's actually never made lightweight, is a lightweight. He's made featherweight before. He's made a bunch of catchweight 160, 165 pound fights. So I have no doubt that he will make the weight. Whereas Stolze is going from being a pretty reasonably sized welterweight down to lightweight. And that seems like a bad idea. I think neither of these guys is UFC caliber. I think Benoit Saint Denis offended the referee in his last fight somehow, because man, did they let Zaleski beat his ass until gassing out and kind of letting Saint Denis have some success. So, but this is the thing. While it is a compliment to say, hey, you're a really tough guy. You're really durable. Your physical durability and mental toughness is impressive. That should not be the only compliments I can pay you coming out of a fight and have me feel good about picking you. That being said, I really don't feel good about Nathan Stolze either. So, and I also have questions about him making the weight. So I'm going to go with Benoit Saint Denis on the virtue of, I think I know what Saint Denis looks like at 155. I think it's a fine look. I think it's not a physically dead 155. And I'm really worried about Stolze cutting down to that weight, because Stolze is 6'1" and not that thin. And I am seeing that he's the underdog heading into this fight. So it looks like a number of other people are maybe having the same thoughts. So yeah, we'll go with Benoit Saint Denis to probably win a decision. He's not the greatest finisher, and Stolze did get finished by Jared Gooden, but Jared Gooden is like a hammer, and I don't think that is that's something that Saint Denis can replicate. Tony Gravely versus Johnny Munoz Jr. This is kind of another one like this where I'm just not really buying on Munoz. He's got great size for bantamweight. He's got a 11-1 record. It's very cool. But he did lose to Nate Maness in his USA debut. And I don't rate Jamie Simons really as anything. And Simons gave him some slight problems. Gravely is a pretty well put together striker, pretty well put together wrestler. And generally speaking, only loses to kind of like high end people. Brett Johns, Nate Maness, I guess that's not that high end, but Patchy Nix, Manny Benitez, Merab Dvalishvili, Ricky Bandejas before the shine kind of got taken off of Bandejas, and then way back to Pat Sabatini. Those are all pretty good names. It's a very, very solid list. I'm taking Gravely to win a decision. Jeff Molina versus Zhalgus Zhumagulov. I always mess up that name. Finally, we're on a fight that I'm pretty interested in. In a lot of ways, these two guys are opposites. I think Zhumagulov has some very good inherent power. He has some very good inherent form on the sort of like first wave of striking exchanges. And I think Molina kind of lacks a little bit of that natural power. He has to make up for it with volume, accuracy, timing, counterpunches, that sort of thing. And I think he lacks that inherent physicality, which means that he has to be higher output. He has to be smarter. He has to be adaptable. He has to be deep. And while his form is, I think, worse, his form holds up. So what I'm saying by that is These two fighters clash in a striking exchange. The first 3-4 punches or strikes thrown, Zhumagulov will look like the crisper technician of the two. The cleaner form, the cleaner punches, kicks, etc. But it breaks down when people take him deeper into that exchange. And Molina's doesn't. Molina's form is a little janky on punch 1 and a little janky on punch 12. Whereas Zhumagulov goes from nice, crisp, clean punch 1 to, my God, what the heck is that on punch 12? What is that absolute garbage baseball throw style of punch as the exchanges go on? I also just trust Molina more as a grappler. I trust his camp. He's a James Krause fighter. That's taken a hit because a couple of James Krause fighters have really fought kind of poorly lately, but I still have belief in that camp, and I have belief in Molina to make adjustments. I think he's going to struggle early. I think he's probably going to lose round number 1 and then start to take over in round number 2 and number 3 as he finds the gaps in Zhumagulov's defense, which are there. And also Zhumagulov's defense is very, 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 very upper body based. He is very kickable in the legs. And while he does good body work himself, he's also pretty vulnerable to getting hit to the body. And I think there's enough holes there for Molina, who's pretty tough, to ride through some adversity, get in trouble, probably a little bit, and pull out the win here, because I don't know why this fight is so low on the card. And it's another one of those sort of weird ones, because Molina is undefeated in the UFC. He's on a overall, what is he on right now? Yeah, he's on a massive winning streak. He had a really rough start to his career. I got to remember that. He went 1-2 out the gate, and then he's won everything since then in a variety of different ways, which is really nice to see. Not necessarily the greatest competition. I mean, even in the UFC, Arichi Lang and Daniel Da Silva are not amazing wins, especially with Arichi Lang finally having admitted that, like, I'm really a bantamweight and I need to get out of this weight class. So there is that at play. And then Daniel Da Silva is just not great. He went out there and got, like, instant E-barred by Francisco Figueiredo. That's really kind of disturbing. But Zhumagulov is coming off a loss. So it's a bit of weird matchmaking. It's it's one of those, like, if we go back in time to, like, me naming, like, future opponents for these guys, or like anyone naming future opponents for these guys off of their last fights, there is no way that you pick this fight, because there's no inherent logic to this matchmaking. But it's fun, and I'm looking forward to the fight. But yeah, I'm hoping Molina picks up the win here. I'm hoping he proves to be just that more adaptable. And like, the problem for Zhumagulov is, if you're not going to be able to take long exchanges, this kind of goes back to the whole Ryan Benoit issue that I was talking about before. This is flyweight, my man. This is flyweight. And you're going to be taken to those 6-punch, 8-strike, 12-strike combination exchanges. And you look kind of sloppy when you do it. Might work at a higher weight class. Andres Michailidis versus Renat Fakhretdinov. I don't know. Fakhretdinov hasn't really fought anyone that really tells me what he can do, and finding footage of him has been kind of hard. Yes, you beat Alberto Uda and you beat Eric Spicely, both of whom are former UFC fighters, both of whom are kind of, air quote, proven commodities, but they're both incredibly flawed commodities. The thing is, after all that, Michailidis is kind of in that same boat. He had some success against Alex Pereira, but it was all grappling based, and Pereira is kind of about as close to a striker only guy you're going to find. and he got beat up by Modestas Bukauskas. That was fine, but Modestas Bukauskas is a properly sized 205er. Michailidis isn't. And then he beat KB Bular, and that doesn't mean much. Like his big claim to fame is spinning back fist knocking out, or spinning back kick knocking out Marcel Fortuna. And I don't really know what that means, because anytime you win by that kind of style, what does it mean? And it was right after Fortuna got cut from the UFC after a pretty poor run. Beat Anthony Hamilton. It's not a bad win. And then lost to Jordan Johnson, Jake Collier, and Andreas Michailidis, and since has beaten Tim Karen, who doesn't really prove much. I don't really know how this is going to play out. I don't know. Like, Fakhretdinov, what I have seen of him, looks physically impressive. Looks like he's got a lot of the hallmarks of the Caucasus scene / Russian scene of MMA fighters. Not really all that impressed with Michailidis. But at the same time, Fakhretdinov hasn't beaten anyone that really tells me really where he fits. I know what he's trying to be, but I have no idea what he is. Still going to pick him here because I don't have faith in Michailidis, but I don't know if I'm really going to have a great idea of what he is after this fight if he does win. So that's kind of the thing. Does have good size for middleweight. I guess that's the one thing I can probably say. My main event, Aaron Blanchfield, JJ Aldridge. Here we go. I really like this fight. I really do. These are two young, well, okay, Aldridge, I guess, is 29 years old. Not necessarily young, but Aldridge has had excellent run in the UFC. Beating Jillian Robertson, beating Vanessa Demopoulos, which is a win that is aging pretty well. Courtney Casey, Polyana Viana, Daniel Taylor. Losses to Macy Barber and Sabrina Mazzo. These are not bad things. These are, well, okay, Mazzo's kind of gone downhill, but Mazzo got thrown into like the wood chipper. Not too long after the Aldridge fight, like she beat Justine Kish, and then it's like time to test her, and Alexis Davis, Marina Agapova, and Miranda Maverick is like kind of a killer's row in the division. But yeah. What I like about Aldridge, she does everything kind of fundamentally well. She pressures well. She has some creativity. She has some good power. She'll transition from striking to grappling pretty well. She'll be smart about it. She'll try to fight to a game plan and try to utilize the opponent's weaknesses to her advantage. These are all things I really, really like. Not necessarily the most physically gifted person on the planet. Not the fastest. Not the most coordinated. But actually very good core strength. And Blanchfield is like really scarily good. Really should be undefeated because there's honestly no reason she should have fought Tracy Cortez when she did. But story for another day. Cortez is boring, but is an incredibly effective fighter. Blanchfield really impressed. Like, I actually kind of overlooked Blanchfield. I'll be the first to say it. I overlooked her when the UFC brought her in because, well, I didn't hold the Cortez fight against her in any way, shape, or form. I didn't really rate beating Victoria Leonardo and Brogan Walker that highly, and I didn't really rate beating Kay Hansen all that highly because Kay Hansen is somebody who just should be at a lower weight class. It was one of those things where, like, you've looked good, but the level of competition isn't necessarily particularly great. Then she came in and absolutely destroyed Sarah Alpar and then absolutely styled on Miranda Maverick. What do you do with that? So I am going to have to pick Blanchfield. Well, I don't necessarily like her technically quite as much. She is also a very good technical fighter. Like almost everything I said about Aldridge, very applicable to Blanchfield. She's got good instincts for striking. She's got a suffocating top game. She will pursue a punishing style control game, which I do really enjoy. I like that. And she's deceptively fast. Like she's the type of girl that if you watch on a bag or whatever, it doesn't really wow you. But then she gets in there with someone who kind of has that wow factor, like a Miranda Maverick. And then watching her do what she does, it does wow you. Like that Maverick win. And don't get me wrong, Miranda Maverick has all kinds of problems as a fighter still that I am significantly concerned about. I do like that she's gone to Elevation Fight Team. She's doing, I think, the right things, going to a bigger camp and so on, and then came up with the bit win over Sabina Mazo, which was pretty cool. But I still do have questions about that. But the fact that Blanchfield went out there and really just made it look like not a big deal, super exciting. Super exciting prospect. She's super young, 23 years old. I know someone's going to throw my own words back at me. Just because someone's young doesn't mean that they're going to develop into something. Doesn't mean that they aren't already a finished product. But one, if this is the finished product, it's still very exciting. And two, she really does seem like someone who is showing wrinkles every time out. Like little gaps in her game that existed against, for example, Brogan Walker, seem to be largely shut against Miranda Maverick. And that's pretty impressive. That does suggest that there's going to be learning and development. It's not like a Kay Hansen, because this of course came up a while ago with Kay Hansen, that like I don't necessarily think she's going to improve despite being super young, because I'm not seeing really any kind of improvement fight to fight. And with Hansen, I think the other thing is that there's a kind of like a culture around her of like blaming other things for her problems. And to be clear, there may be 100% validity. I talked about that when I was talking about Kay Hansen's like weight cutting, that like she needs to get down to straw weight because at flyweight, it's just not going to work. And of course, her comments has been that to make straw weight, she has to really be quite unhealthy. That could be entirely true. But like, if that's the case, it is going to short circuit her career. Like, that's the thing. Like, okay, I understand. Other things probably that can, and again, to finalize the Kay Hansen thing, seems like a very intelligent person. I would hope that she would go out there and do that. She had some academic credentials and some other things, and also has the OnlyFans, which I don't understand. But there are other avenues of making a living, and that maybe is something you need to pursue. But with Blanchfield, it really does feel like she is learning, she is improving, and she's physically not hit her prime yet. So this is a scary prospect to look out for. And if she goes out there and she I'm not going to say destroyed, but she convincingly just shuts down JJ Aldridge, we got ourselves a future title contender. And that's really all I can say about that. And it's exciting. It's the flyweight division is kind of a weird place because, admittedly, I still don't think any of these girls, Blanchfield or others, are remotely ready to challenge Valentina Shevchenko. It's kind of like, Tyler Santos is a good fighter, but like, I don't think she can win. And as long as that's the case, that's going to be a bit of a problem. But like the cut below Valentina Shevchenko is very exciting because you've got people like Erin Blanchfield, like Manon Fiorot, like if they could sort themselves out, Macy Barber and Miranda Maverick, and even like some people like Viviane Pereira. Is that who I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of Viviane, the girl that Andrea KGB Lee just lost to, and led to the whole drama about her. Viviane Araujo. Pardon me. I know there is a Viviane Pereira, but it's not who I'm thinking of. And then, even like it's a pretty young division. It's still a developing division, and I really like what I'm seeing from it. It's just, their champion is incredibly destructive. You got Alexa Grasso in there as well. Very good fighter. You've got Casey O'Neill. Casey O'Neill is kind of intriguing. And then you've got Tracy Cortez, kind of boring, but still. And then Marina Moros. And then Montana De La Rosa. Maybe Andrea Lee. JJ Aldrich. We're just talking about Melissa Gatto. If she could sort out some of her problems. Maria Agapova, if she can figure out some of her problems and her general insanity. I have no faith that Agapova will work out her shit. But but the rest I do have a lot of faith in. So yeah, it's an exciting division, and I would like to see it get some main events because, again, it has 0 main events. And heavyweight gets 12 in the last 61 events. 20%. Screw that. Oddly constructed card, but like I said, I'm looking forward to a lot of on the card. And this is one that you're going to want to watch early because Blanchfield and Aldridge, like I said, that's my main event. It's the first fight. Maybe that's a good idea because you'll get me to turn in and watch it live early, but I don't know. I don't. I still don't. I still think that card should be structured with some kind of logic behind them that is consistent. And that's not the case here. But anyways. And this is also how you end up missing things. It's like, this is the problem with like Demetrius Johnson's flyweight run was you had fights on the Fight Pass prelims that ended up determining title contenders. And then when people saw Demetrius Johnson fighting this guy that they've never heard of, the assumption was he was a can. When the truth was, with the exception of Chris Carriasso, which is still confusing as to how that got a title shot, but exclude Chris Carriasso, everyone was actually a pretty, really good fighter and someone who had achieved a fair bit and was on a pretty hot run. There you go. Anyways, that's today's episode. I'll see you on the recap next week.